Her children's feet were bleeding into the snow, not from the cold but from the gravel, 3 miles of sharp, frozen stone they'd already walked that morning. The frontier road stretched empty ahead, and in that moment Sarah Miller faced a truth that would shatter a nation. This wasn't 1874. This was yesterday. Sarah Miller was a modern mother, not a pioneer. Her family's car had broken down 60 miles back, and in that moment, she represented a hidden crisis exploding across rural America right now. Families with children, living in vehicles and dying by inches on back roads nobody sees. So why, when a stranger finally stopped that morning, did he get off his horse and give the one thing that made no sense at all? 6 months earlier, Sarah Miller had a home. A small rental outside Boise, a job at a call center, and a minivan that always started. The unraveling was so quiet, so bureaucratic, it felt like slipping down a slope you never saw coming. First, her son Liam's asthma got worse. The ER visit wasn't covered. The $1,200 bill might as well have been $12 million. Then her hours got cut. The landlord, a decent man for 5 years, sold the property. The new owner gave her 30 days. The rent was going up $400 a month. Sarah did everything right. She applied for assistance. She was put on a waiting list, 8 to 12 months for a housing voucher. She called every shelter within 50 miles. The 2 family shelters in the county had 16 beds total. Both were full. A voice on a recording told her to call back next month. This is the reality for the nearly 150,000 children who experienced homelessness on a single night last year. A 39% increase in just 12 months. Families with children represent the fastest growing segment of the homeless population in America. And in rural communities, the crisis is invisible by design. There are no crowded shelters to film, no tent cities under bridges. Instead, families live in the shadows, in cars parked behind Walmart, in campers with no heat, in barns owned by strangers who might ask for something in return. Sarah's minivan became their home. She parked at truck stops, in church lots, anywhere with a bathroom she could use before dawn. She kept the kids in school. That was the anchor. But the van died on a Tuesday in November on a county road with no cell service. She spent her last $80 on a tow to a mechanic who said the transmission was gone. $1,500 to fix it. She had $17. For 3 days they stayed with the mechanic, a kind man who let them sleep in his waiting room. But he had a business to run. On the 4th morning he gave her a map. He said there was a church in the next town over, 30 miles away, that sometimes helped folks. He filled their old backpack with granola bars and wished her luck. They walked. Sarah carried 4-year-old Chloe. 7-year-old Liam and 5-year-old Ava walked beside her. They had one sleeping bag between them. The December cold wasn't a weather event, it was a predator. And after 3 miles, the gravel road had won. The children's sneakers, thin from a year of wear, were shredded. Their socks were stained with blood. This is where the story should end. In tragedy, in a statistic, another family that slipped through the cracks of a system that sees housing as a commodity, not a right. But that's when the hoofbeats started. He came over the rise on a big bay horse, a rancher in a waxed canvas coat. He took in the scene, a woman frozen in fear, clutching her children, their bloody footprints in the snow. He didn't speak at first. He just sat there looking. Then he did something that defied every modern instinct. He swung down from his saddle. He walked to his horse, pulled off his own heavy, well-oiled work boots. He knelt in the snow in front of Liam, the oldest boy whose feet were shaking. He said, "Try these on, son." They were enormous on the child. He stuffed them with strips of cloth from his saddlebag. Then he lifted Chloe, the youngest, onto the front of his saddle, tucking her inside his coat. He looked at Sarah. "My place is 2 miles up this road. You can make it 2 miles. This act of radical charity is the part we want to believe in. The lone savior, the boots given freely. But here is the first terrifying twist. That rancher, Sam Henderson, wasn't just being kind. He was breaking the law. In more than half of all U.S. states, what is known as Good Samaritan laws have a chilling exception. They do not protect unlicensed individuals who take homeless minors into their care. By putting Chloe on his horse and leading Sarah's family to his home, Sam Henderson opened himself up to a charge of kidnapping, or worse, child endangerment. He knew the risk, because 2 years prior, a neighbor of his, an older woman named Helen, had let a homeless teenage boy sleep in her barn during a blizzard. The boy's mother was in a drug treatment program 60 miles away. When Child Services found out, Helen was charged with interfering with custody and harboring a minor. The case was eventually dropped, but not before she spent $7,000 on a lawyer. Sam Henderson knew all of this, yet he knelt in the snow. Why? The answer is buried in his own past. And to understand it, you have to understand the second, darker layer of this crisis. The layer where child welfare and homelessness collide with brutal force. Data shows that inadequate housing is a direct factor in at least 10% of all foster care placements. For a child experiencing homelessness, the risk of being removed from their family and placed in state custody is 34 times higher than for a child with stable housing. The system, designed to protect, often punishes the victim. Poverty is treated as neglect. Sam Henderson grew up in foster care. He was separated from his sister when he was 8. He knew what it meant to have your family shattered by well-intentioned strangers with clipboards. So when he saw Sarah Miller and her children on that road, he didn't see a case. He saw his own mother. He saw his sister. He saw the cliff edge of the system. He brought them to his ranch. He gave them the spare room over the garage, an apartment he'd built for hired hands that never stayed. He gave them food, warm clothes, and for the first time in weeks, safety. For 3 days it worked. The children's feet healed. Sarah slept through the night. But on the 4th day, a county sheriff's cruiser came up the long gravel driveway, and the deputy wasn't there to help. He was there because someone had called in a tip, a report of unrelated minors being housed in unsafe conditions. Someone had been watching, and they decided that a warm room and 3 meals a day was more dangerous than a frozen roadside. Deputy Miller, no relation to Sarah, stood on the porch with his hat in his hands. He wasn't angry, he looked exhausted. "Sam," he said, "you know I have to ask, are these children related to you?" In that question lies the entire trap of the system. The law draws a bright, brutal line. A stranger cannot house a minor without state approval. It doesn't matter if the alternative is a frozen ditch. It doesn't matter if the parent is standing right there, consenting. Bureaucracy sees only risk, and risk must be managed. Sam told the truth. "No, they're not. Their car broke down. They had nowhere to go." The deputy nodded like he'd heard this script before. He asked to see the children. He asked Sarah for identification. He asked where they'd been sleeping for the past week. Each answer was written in a small notebook. Each one tightened the legal noose. The tip, it turned out, had come from a passing driver, a commuter who saw a disheveled woman with kids being led onto private property. They'd called the non-emergency line out of concern. This is the other side of rural life. Everyone sees everything, and fear often masquerades as vigilance. The deputy's hands were tied. Protocol was clear. He had to file a report with Child Protective Services. A case would be opened. An investigator would be assigned. For Sarah Miller, this was her worst nightmare materializing. A CPS case isn't just paperwork, it's a black mark. It can disqualify you from future housing assistance. It can follow you for years. For Sam Henderson, it was a violation of a core principle. Help should not be a crime. But here is where the story twists. Deputy Miller didn't leave. He finished his notes, put his hat back on, and then said something off script. "My sister's family lived in their car for 6 weeks last winter, over in Jefferson County. The system didn't have a bed for them either." He looked at the children's faces in the window. "I'll write the report, but I'll be damned if I'm gonna make it sound urgent." This is the first crack in the monolith. A low-level public servant choosing to slow-walk the machinery of the state. It happens more than you think, because the people enforcing these policies are often neighbors. They see the reality the laws ignore. The report was filed, but it was categorized as a wellness check, not a neglect investigation. That bought maybe 72 hours. Sam knew it wasn't enough. The CPS investigator would come, and when they did, they would be required by law to assess the safety of the environment. A ranch hand's apartment over a garage, with no separate kitchen and only one exit, would likely fail. The children could be placed in emergency foster care for their own protection. Sarah could be charged with failure to provide. So Sam made a decision. He wouldn't wait for the system to arrive. He would go through it. He called a lawyer in Boise, a woman named Anya Patel who specialized in housing and poverty law. He explained the situation. Her first words were, "Do not, under any circumstances, let them leave that property until I get there. If they go into state custody, getting them back is a labyrinth." Anya arrived the next morning. She listened to Sarah's entire story, the medical debt, the eviction, the full shelters. She examined the apartment. Then she laid out the brutal chess game they were now in. The state's priority is mitigating liability. Keeping kids in an unlicensed setting is a liability. Their goal will be to remove the children to a licensed foster home, which are also overwhelmingly full. This creates a perverse incentive. They may try to separate the family to fit them into scattered, available beds. But Anya had a countermove. A little-known clause in the state's child welfare code allowed for kinship placement or fictive kin placement. If a non-relative has a significant bond with the child and provides a safe environment, they can sometimes be approved as a temporary guardian, bypassing the foster system. It was rarely used for strangers, but it was possible. The plan was audacious. Sam would apply to be a fictive kin provider for Liam, Ava, and Chloe. This would keep the children with Sarah under his roof legally, but the application process took weeks. They had to buy time. Then the second revelation hit. Anya, digging into county records, discovered something sinister. The reason the family shelters were perpetually full wasn't just funding. It was by design. 5 years ago, the county board had slashed the homelessness services budget by 40%. They'd redirected the money to a tax incentive for a new data center that promised 75 jobs. The jobs never materialized. The shelter beds never came back. The official county line was efficient resource allocation. The reality was a humanitarian blockade, and the sheriff's department, including Deputy Miller's superiors, were under quiet pressure to manage the visibility of the homeless population. Unofficial policy was to move them along to neighboring counties if possible. Helping them settle, even temporarily, created a local burden. Sam Henderson wasn't just battling a well-meaning but rigid law. He was facing a coordinated policy of neglect. The anonymous tip wasn't just nosy neighbor. It was the desired outcome of a system that wanted the problem to disappear. This is where Sam's past collided with the present. He'd been that child. After his mother lost her job in their apartment, he and his sister were taken into custody for their safety. They were placed in separate foster homes 50 miles apart. He saw his sister 4 times in 3 years. The trauma of that separation never left him. It's why he bought this remote ranch, a place of safety that no one could take from him. He told Anya and Sarah everything. "They use the law to break families," he said, his voice quiet. "They call it protection. It's destruction. I won't let it happen again on my land." With the clock ticking, Anya filed the fictive kin application in a blizzard of paperwork. Simultaneously, she contacted a nonprofit investigative journalist she knew. If the law couldn't be moved by morality, perhaps it could be moved by shame. The journalist started asking the county board questions about the shelter budget. 3 days later, the CPS investigator arrived. Her name was Gail. She was professional, polite, and utterly focused on checklist compliance. The apartment failed on 3 counts. No child-proof locks on the cabinets under the sink. The window in the children's room was too high to be an emergency egress, and there was no written fire evacuation plan. Gale's recommendation, dictated in front of them, was immediate placement of the minors in licensed foster care pending parental stability assessment. Sarah began to cry silently. Sam felt a cold rage. But then Gale's phone rang. She stepped outside to take it. When she came back in, her demeanor had shifted slightly. The call was from her supervisor. The journalist's inquiries had reached the county administrator's office. A political spotlight was flickering to life. Gale looked at her clipboard, then at the children drawing at the kitchen table. She offered a compromise. If Mr. Henderson can install the safety locks and draft an evacuation plan by 5 p.m. today, and if the children are seen by a pediatrician for a wellness check within 48 hours, I can classify this as a safety plan instead of a removal order. The fictive kin application would still need to proceed, but the children could stay during the review. It was a stay of execution. Sam drove to the hardware store immediately. The pediatrician, a friend of a friend, agreed to see them the next day as a favor. For a moment it seemed the tide might turn, but the forces arrayed against them were just getting started. The following evening, a certified letter arrived for Sam Henderson. It was from the county zoning board. A complaint had been filed regarding the unauthorized use of residential agricultural property for multifamily transitional housing. It cited a code about transient occupancy. The penalty was a fine of $250 per day. The complaint was anonymous, but the language was precise, legalistic. It didn't come from a worried neighbor. It came from someone who knew how to use code enforcement as a weapon. Sam was now fighting on two fronts, child welfare and zoning law. The message was clear: make the problem go away, or we will bury you in violations until you have no choice. Anya Patel identified the likely source, a local property development group that had been buying up distressed land in the area. Sam's 600-acre ranch was a missing piece in a large parcel they wanted to assemble. He refused to sell. Twice. Making his life difficult and costly was a classic pressure tactic. The kindness of a rancher had now triggered a hidden war over land, money, and the very right to exist quietly on the frontier. Saving a family from the cold had made Sam a target. And then the final blow landed. Sarah Miller received a voicemail from the Boise Housing Authority. Her application for an emergency housing voucher filed months ago had been reviewed. She was denied. The reason: insufficient demonstration of independent stability. The CPS case, though not yet a finding of neglect, was a relevant factor in their decision. The system had closed its loop. It had created a crisis through lack of shelter, punished her for finding an unsafe alternative, and then used that punishment to deny her the safe alternative. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. Standing in Sam's kitchen, holding the denial letter, Sarah whispered the words that define our national failure. I have nowhere to go, and I'm not allowed to stay here. That's when Sam Henderson made his choice. He wouldn't just fight the bureaucracy. He would break it. He told Anya to file a lawsuit, not just an appeal, a federal civil rights lawsuit against the county, alleging that its policies of defunding shelters and criminalizing private aid effectively criminalized homelessness itself, violating the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. It was a nuclear option. It would cost tens of thousands of dollars. It would take years, and it would make him a pariah in his own community. But as he looked at Liam, Ava, and Chloe, who now called him Uncle Sam, he knew the truth. The frontier wasn't a place anymore. It was a condition. It was what happened when you were pushed to the very edge of what society was willing to tolerate. And sometimes, the only thing left to do was to plant your flag in that barren ground and fight for it. He filed the papers the next morning, and within 6 hours, the sheriff himself was on Sam's porch, not with a deputy but with the county attorney. The game had just changed from a quiet zoning nuisance to a raging public fire, and the county attorney had one question, delivered not as a request, but as a threat. Mr. Henderson, Just how far are you willing to go to protect a woman you met on the road last week?" Sam Henderson looked at the county attorney and gave the only answer a man with nothing left to lose can give. "All the way," he said, "and you just made me famous." He was right. The lawsuit, captioned Miller and Henderson v. Custer County, was a dry legal document. But Anya Patel, the lawyer, didn't file it quietly. She sent it to every major state newspaper and the investigative journalist who'd been asking questions. The headline wrote itself: "Rancher sued for giving boots to homeless children." The story went viral not in days but in hours. It had all the elements: a heroic cowboy, a desperate mother bleeding children in the snow, and a faceless bureaucracy using zoning laws to punish compassion. National news crews descended on the ranch. Satellite trucks lined the county road. This publicity was a double-edged sword. It created a shield. The county couldn't quietly crush Sam under fines or remove the children with cameras rolling. But it also painted a target on his back and on Sarah's. The public scrutiny was a hurricane, and they were at the eye. The first consequence was personal. The county attorney's threat materialized. Sam received notice that his property taxes were being reassessed. The valuation of his land jumped by 60%, based on comparable recent sales orchestrated by the very development group trying to buy him out. His annual tax bill skyrocketed by thousands of dollars. Then the social ostracization began. At the local feed store, men he'd known for 20 years turned their backs. He was called a media whore and a socialist on the county's online forum. A flyer appeared on the community bulletin board calling for a boycott of his hay sales. The message was clear: "You broke the code of silence. You embarrassed us. Now you pay." But the storm also stirred up allies. Donations started pouring into a legal fund set up by Anya. Letters of support arrived from across the country, many from people who had been in Sarah's situation. A retired judge from another state offered pro bono consulting on the lawsuit. A group of local church women, defying the public sentiment, organized a meal train for the family. Most importantly, the spotlight forced the system to show its guts. Reporters filed public records requests. They uncovered emails between the county board chair and the head of the development group, discussing the economic burden of homeless services and the need to encourage turnover of underutilized agricultural land. The phrase "underutilized" was a bullet aimed at ranches like Sam's. The investigative journalist working with Anya found the smoking gun: a memo from the county administrator, written 2 years prior, advising the board that reducing shelter capacity would incentivize transient populations to seek services elsewhere, reducing local law enforcement costs. This wasn't neglect through incompetence. It was calculated policy. They had made a conscious decision to make homelessness someone else's problem. This revelation changed the lawsuit from a sympathetic story into a brutal expose of systemic cruelty. The legal claim expanded. The county had created a state-created danger. By deliberately dismantling the safety net, they had forced people like Sarah into life-threatening situations, then punished those who tried to help. The county scrambled. They held an emergency closed-door meeting. Their response was not to fix the problem, but to manage the narrative. They announced the temporary reopening of 5 shelter beds in a converted motel. It was a token gesture, but it was an admission of guilt. For Sarah, the fame was a fresh kind of terror. Her past was dissected online. Her medical debt, her job loss, were framed by some as personal failings. She lived in constant fear that the tide of public opinion would turn, that they would decide she was an unfit mother after all. The love she felt for her children was now a matter of public debate. But within this chaos, a deeper, more personal threat emerged. Sarah's ex-husband, the children's father, had been absent for years. He saw the news. He hired a lawyer. He filed a motion in family court for emergency custody, citing the dangerous and unstable environment shown on television. His argument was grotesque. He claimed that allowing the children to live with a strange man on a ranch proved Sarah was an unfit guardian. This was the "wait, it gets worse" moment. The very act of seeking safety had given a neglectful parent a legal weapon. Family court was a different battlefield with different rules, and a father's rights, however dormant, are powerfully protected by law. Anya was blunt. We can win the lawsuit against the county and still lose the children in family court. His claim is legally potent. They needed to prove the father was unfit, which required time and evidence they didn't have. The custody hearing was set for 3 weeks away. The pressure fractured the temporary peace on the ranch. Sarah retreated into a shell of anxiety. Sam, fighting a war on 4 fronts, taxes, zoning, the federal lawsuit, and now a custody battle, was stretched to his limit. The children felt the tension. Liam started having nightmares again. It was at this lowest point that the second, more profound revelation came. It didn't come from a lawyer or a reporter. It came from Deputy Miller, the man who'd written the first report. He asked to meet Sam at the diner on the edge of town, off the record. Over bad coffee, the deputy laid it out. "The development group," he said, keeping his voice low. "They don't just want your land. One of their silent partners is on the board of the private foster care agency that has the county contract." He let that sink in. Every kid placed in foster care means a per diem payment from the state to that agency, around $100 a day per child. The pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity. Defunding shelters created more homeless families. Homeless families were more likely to have children removed. Removed children were placed in foster care, generating revenue for a private company. The zoning harassment against Sam was not just about land. It was about protecting a revenue stream. They weren't just pushing the problem away. They were profiting from its consequences. Sam's act of kindness had inadvertently threatened a perverse, local economy of misery. This was no longer about bureaucratic indifference. This was about active, malicious incentivization. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed for the people who designed it. Armed with this information, Anya amended the lawsuit again. She added the private foster agency and the development group as co-conspirators, alleging a racketeering scheme under federal RICO statutes, using county policy to fraudulently generate state payments. This was the nuclear option within the nuclear option. RICO charges carry prison time. The response was immediate and vicious. The county attorney held a press conference, not to address the shelter crisis, but to announce he was filing criminal charges against Sam Henderson for harboring a minor and interfering with a child custody investigation, referring to the father's new custody claim. Sam was served papers. He was to be arraigned in 2 days. If convicted, he faced up to 18 months in jail. The goal was obvious: criminalize the rescuer so utterly that no one would ever dare follow his example, make him a cautionary tale. The night before the arraignment, Sam sat on his porch. He was facing financial ruin, social exile, and jail time, all for taking in a stranded family for a few nights. He asked himself the question the whole country was now asking: was it worth it? He looked through the window. Sarah was reading to Chloe. Liam was showing Ava a toy tractor. They were safe, warm, and together. For now, that was his answer. The next morning, he walked into the county courthouse, past a throng of reporters and protesters. He was prepared to plead not guilty and fight. But as he entered the courtroom, he saw it was packed, not just with media. Dozens of local residents were there. The church women, a few neighboring ranchers, even the mechanic who'd first helped Sarah. And then something extraordinary happened. As the judge called the case, one by one, people in the gallery stood up. They didn't say a word, they just stood. It was a silent, powerful rebuke. The judge, an older man who'd lived in the county his whole life, looked out at the sea of standing citizens. He saw the national news cameras. He saw the federal lawsuit pending. He saw a community divided, but in that moment, he saw the part that was choosing to stand with Sam. The county attorney, looking uneasy, approached the bench. A hushed conversation took place. Then the judge addressed the court. Given the unique circumstances and the pending federal litigation which may bear on the factual core of these charges, this court is suspending these criminal proceedings indefinitely. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a tactical retreat by the county. They had overplayed their hand. The public spectacle of jailing a man for giving boots to children was a bridge too far. For the first time, Sam had won a round. But as he walked out of the courthouse, a free man for now, he knew the real battle was just beginning. The custody hearing loomed. The federal RICO case was a long shot. The tax bill was still due, and the development group was still out there. He had won a skirmish by becoming a symbol, but symbols are fragile, and the forces arrayed against him were real, patient, and funded. They could wait for the cameras to leave. He couldn't. As he drove back to the ranch, a new question formed, one that would decide everything. He had proven that one man could shake the system, but could he actually break it? Or would the system, as it always had, simply absorb the shock, wait him out, and grind his defiance into dust? The answer would come from the most unlikely place of all, from the quiet, terrified woman he'd found on the road. Because Sarah Miller was done being a victim. She was ready to tell her story, and she was going to start with the man who wanted to take her children away. Sarah Miller walked into the family court building wearing the same patched dress she'd worn on the road. But she wasn't the same woman. She carried a manila folder, and inside it was proof that the system wasn't just broken, it was rigged against families like hers from the start. For 3 weeks, while Sam fought the public battle, Sarah had been working in silence. With Anya's help, she had subpoenaed records. She had found every piece of paper that traced the path from her eviction to that frozen road. And she had discovered something about her ex-husband, Mark. He wasn't just an absent father reappearing for the cameras. He was a gambler, and he owed $30,000 to a man connected to the same development group trying to take Sam's land. The custody claim wasn't about parental love. It was a financial transaction, a pressure play. If Mark got custody, he could be persuaded to sign over any future claims to the children's stability, or, in a worst-case scenario, settle for a cash payment to disappear again. The children were leverage in a real estate war. Sarah presented this evidence to the family court judge in a closed hearing. She showed the debt records, the text messages between Mark and an unknown number discussing the ranch situation. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened without expression. Then she called Mark to the stand. Under oath, his story fell apart. He couldn't name the children's teachers. He didn't know Liam's asthma medication. He admitted he hadn't seen them in over 2 years. When confronted with the debt records, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. It was over in 20 minutes. The judge didn't just deny Mark's custody petition. She terminated his parental rights entirely, citing abandonment and demonstrable financial coercion. It was the rarest of outcomes, a complete severance. Mark Miller would never legally be their father again. For Sarah, it was a liberation of cosmic scale. The man who had haunted her fears was gone. The children were legally, irrevocably hers, but the victory was bittersweet. It proved that the threats to her family weren't just random misfortune. They were orchestrated. This victory became the first domino. With the custody threat eliminated, the federal lawsuit gained unstoppable momentum. The county, facing the RICO allegations and a mountain of bad publicity, entered settlement talks. They had a choice: go to trial and risk exposing the entire profit scheme, or negotiate. Anya Patel drove a hard bargain. The settlement had 3 parts. First, the county would fully restore and double its shelter funding, creating 20 new family shelter beds and a daytime resource center. Second, they would adopt a right to shelter ordinance, guaranteeing a roof to any family with children within 48 hours of request. Third, they would drop all zoning violations and tax reassessments against Sam Henderson and pay his legal fees. In return, Sam and Sarah would drop the RICO charges against the individual county officials and the private foster agency. The development group, now exposed and facing separate federal investigation, was cut loose. They would fight their own battles. The settlement was signed on a Tuesday in March. The snow had melted, revealing the muddy ground of early spring. Sam Henderson stood on his porch, a free man with a free ranch, and watched a county crew install a new sign at the end of his driveway. It read, "Custer County Family Shelter, West Annex." His over-garage apartment was now a licensed, county-supported transitional housing unit. He was no longer a criminal harborer. He was a contracted service provider. Sarah and her children were his first official residents. The fictive kin application was approved in perpetuity. Sam was now, in the eyes of the state, their uncle, a legal fiction that made a profound truth official. They were family. But the story doesn't end with a signed paper. It ends with a choice. Sam could have taken the settlement money and gone back to his quiet life. Sarah could have taken the first available housing voucher and moved to a small apartment in town. Instead, they did the opposite. Using a portion of the donated legal fund money that remained, they founded the Frontier Family Fund, a nonprofit that buys old motels and rundown ranches and converts them into licensed, decentralized family shelters. Their model is simple: use existing rural structures, keep families together, and provide wraparound services, job training, legal aid, childcare, on site. They hired Anya Patel as general counsel. They hired Deputy Miller, who quit the sheriff's office in disillusionment, as their director of security and community relations. Their first acquisition was the very motel the county had temporarily reopened. They bought it from the bankrupt owner. They renamed it the Henderson Miller House. This is the final surprising detail. The crisis that almost destroyed them revealed a hidden economy of suffering, but their response revealed a hidden economy of hope. In the first 6 months of operation, the Frontier Family Fund housed 47 families. Not one child entered the foster care system. The county, seeing the results, began contracting with them, redirecting funds from the private foster agency that had been profiting from removal. The system didn't shatter, it bent, it adapted, because Sam and Sarah offered a cheaper, more humane, and more effective solution. They beat the profiteers at their own game, the bottom line. On the 1-year anniversary of the day Sam gave his boots to Liam, a ceremony was held at the ranch. Liam, now 8, stood beside Sam. He was wearing those same boots, now scuffed and worn, stuffed with 2 pairs of socks to fit. Sam was teaching him to care for leather, to respect the things that protect you. Sarah stood with Ava and Chloe, watching. She was the operations manager for the fund. She had her own office, her own salary, and a housing voucher she no longer needed. She lived in the apartment over the garage by choice. It was home. The ceremony was for the groundbreaking of a new shelter on a donated property 2 counties over. As Sam shoveled the first bit of earth, he looked out at the crowd. Former homeless families, volunteers, even a few county board members who'd once voted to defund shelters. He didn't give a speech. He just said, "No more bleeding feet." That's the real payoff. Not a courtroom victory, but a blueprint. A proof that the frontier spirit isn't about rugged individualism. It's about community forged in hardship. It's about recognizing that the stranger on your road isn't a problem to be managed. They're a neighbor who hasn't moved in yet. The Millers never got their old life back. They built a new one from the gravel up. And Sam Henderson learned that the ghosts of his past, the sister he lost to foster care, could finally rest, because he had become the shelter he never had. The story that began with an act of illegal kindness ends with a radical, legal revolution. And it asks us the only question that matters. When you see the footprints in the snow, what will you risk to follow them? So what is the true cost of a pair of boots? For Sam Henderson, it was everything he had. For Liam Miller, it was a future. And for us? That's the question this story leaves burning in the cold air. We began with a mother and 3 barefoot children on a frontier road. But the frontier was never a place. It is the line we draw between us and them. It is the distance we allow to exist between our comfort and another person's desperation. Sam Henderson erased that line, and in doing so, he exposed the machinery that works day and night to keep it firmly in place. The statistics are not abstract. They are Sarah. They are Liam, Ava, and Chloe. Nearly 150,000 children experiencing homelessness on any given night is not a policy failure. It is a moral catastrophe. A 39% surge in families with children losing their homes is not an economic indicator. It is a national emergency conducted in silence. The system that tried to punish Sam for caring is the same system that profits from despair. It is a loop. Defund shelters, criminalize survival, harvest children into foster care for revenue, and call it protection. Sam and Sarah broke that loop. They proved that compassion is not a weakness. It is the most powerful tool for structural change we possess. Their story is a blueprint, but it is not a fairy tale. It is a call to arms. It asks us to look at the empty motels on the edges of our own towns, at the closed schools, at the forgotten barns, and see not ruins but refuge. It demands we question why, in the richest nation on earth, a parent working full-time cannot afford a roof. It challenges us to become the chance for someone else. The next time you see a family struggling, you will remember this. You will remember that the law can be wrong, that bureaucracy can be cruel, but you will also remember that a man on a horse can get off, give his boots away, and change the course of history. The most radical act is often the simplest. See the person. Choose to help. The frontier road is everywhere. It is the street you drive down every day. The question is not whether someone is walking it. The question is what you will do when you see them. If this story changed how you see the world, hit that subscribe button. I tell stories that expose the hidden systems shaping our lives, and your support helps me find the next one. Share this with one person who needs to hear it. And in the comments, tell me, what line will you erase? Thank you for watching, and remember, look for the footprints.